They ripped Madison's dress in front of 200 high society guests and called her trash. Her boyfriend Matthew stood in silence as his own mother, Sophia, stepped forward and slapped Madison across the face. The crowd laughed. Phones went up. Within minutes, millions were watching her humiliation live. But they made one fatal mistake. Because the moment a blacked-out Rolls-Royce pulled up outside that ballroom, everything they thought they knew about Madison shattered forever. Before the truth explodes, subscribe right now for stories of real justice and karma, and comment where you're watching from, because what happens next destroys reputations permanently. The slap echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Silk gowns shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, champagne glasses froze midair, laughter stuttered into shocked gasps, then quickly returned, louder, uglier, feeding on the spectacle unfolding at the center of the room. Madison stood perfectly still, her head turned from the impact, her cheek burning, her breath caught somewhere between shame and disbelief. Sophia Lancaster didn't flinch. She lowered her hand slowly, as if she had just corrected a disobedient child rather than assaulted a grown woman in front of 200 witnesses. Her diamond bracelets chimed softly as her wrist settled back into place. The sound carried, sharp, delicate, cruel. Madison's eyes flicked sideways. Matthew was right there. Close enough that she could feel the tension radiating from him, close enough that he could see the trembling in her hands, close enough to stop this with a single word. He said nothing. His jaw tightened. His gaze drifted, not to his mother, not to the crowd, but to the marble floor beneath his polished shoes. Silence, chosen and deliberate. That silence cut deeper than the slap. A ripple of whispers moved through the room, curiosity mutating into hunger. People leaned in. Phones lifted higher. Red recording icons bloomed across screens like warning lights. Someone laughed too loudly near the back of the hall. Then another joined in. Madison's breath finally broke free. She lifted her eyes and met Sophia's gaze. Sophia smiled. Not triumphantly. Not angrily. Calmly, like someone who knew she would never face consequences for what she had just done. Remove her, Sophia said, cool and clipped. She's embarrassing the family. That was when Natalie, Matthew's sister, surged forward. She grabbed the strap of Madison's pale blue dress and yanked. The fabric tore with a brutal, unmistakable sound. Madison gasped. Instinct took over as she clutched the torn fabric against her shoulder, heat rushing through her body in a wave so intense it left her dizzy. The crowd reacted instantly. Laughter, gasps, more phones raised higher, closer. Security began pushing through the guests. Someone's livestream viewer count ticked past 100,000 in real time. Madison searched for Matthew again. Still nothing. That was the moment something inside her shifted, not cracked, not shattered, but hardened. The fear drained away, leaving behind a strange, steady calm. Her humiliation had become entertainment, yes, but it was also evidence. Proof, laid bare under chandeliers and camera flashes. Proof of exactly who these people were. Sophia stepped closer, her perfume sharp and expensive. You should have stayed in your place, she said quietly, for Madison alone. Madison didn't reply. She didn't need to. Outside the Grand Armitage ballroom, the night air had begun to vibrate. At first, no one noticed. Music still played. Laughter still rolled. Security kept moving forward. Phones kept recording. Then the ground trembled. A low, powerful engine growled through the pavement. Deep, controlled, deliberate. The vibration carried through glass and marble, through silk and skin. Conversations faltered. Guests turned instinctively toward the towering windows lining the far wall. Headlights swept across the courtyard. A blacked-out Rolls-Royce Phantom glided into view. The vehicle was impossible to miss, even among luxury cars. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if the world outside was expected to make room for it, which, strangely, it did. Valets froze. Guards straightened. The driver's door opened with effortless precision. A man stepped out. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably composed. The laughter inside the ballroom died in a single breath. Phones wobbled in stunned hands. Whispers turned sharp and frantic. That's not possible. No, wait, that's... Security stalled. Sophia turned toward the windows, irritation flickering across her face for the first time all night. What now? She snapped. The ballroom doors swung open. 4 men in dark suits entered first, their presence quiet, controlled, absolute. Then the man from the Rolls-Royce followed. Even those who had never met him recognized him instantly. Victor Hale. Tech magnate. Global investor. Media recluse. The man whose name moved markets with a single sentence. The air in the room changed. Victor's eyes locked onto one person only. Madison. He crossed the ballroom without hesitation. Conversations dissolved around him, features blurring at the edges as all attention narrowed to the space between father and daughter. When he reached her, he didn't speak at first. He removed his tailored jacket and draped it gently around her shoulders, shielding the torn fabric, the exposed skin, the damage done. Only then did he look at her face. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. Madison tried to answer. No sound came out. Her chin trembled once. Victor's hand tightened around her shoulder, not forceful, not protective, just steady. Then he turned. His gaze settled on Sophia. The change was immediate. Sophia's posture stiffened. Her lips parted slightly. The color began to drain from her face in visible stages, like a system failing in real time. Victor spoke calmly. "You struck my daughter." The room erupted in noise. Phones surged upward. Gasps turned into shouts. Names spread through the crowd faster than fire through dry grass. "Her daughter? You mean?" Sophia stumbled back a step. "Mr. Hale, there's been a misunderstanding. I didn't know." "That," Victor interrupted, his voice still quiet, "is precisely the problem." He removed his phone from his pocket and turned the screen outward. On it played a dozen angles of the same moment. Sophia's slap, Natalie's tearing hands, Madison's stumble, Matthew's silence. The live stream numbers were still climbing. Victor raised his eyes. "Now," he said, "the world knows." Madison felt the room tilt, not with dizziness, but with tension so sharp it felt physical. Everything had shifted. Power, exposure, consequence, all of it rushing toward a collision no one in this room was prepared for. Victor turned slightly toward Madison again. "Come," he said softly. She hesitated, not from fear, not from uncertainty, but because her eyes found Matthew one last time. He was pale, frozen, reduced to something small and unrecognizable. For a brief second, their gazes locked. Then Madison turned away, and followed her father. The ballroom doors closed behind them with a muted finality. Inside, chaos swelled, voices overlapping, phones still recording, names being whispered like wildfire, but none of it reached Madison anymore. The moment she crossed the threshold beside her father, the noise fell away as if someone had pressed mute on the world. Victor Hale kept his hand lightly at her back as they moved through the corridor. Not guiding, not controlling, just there. Steady. Certain. The walk felt unreal, like stepping out of a storm into perfectly still air. Only when they reached the Rolls-Royce did Madison finally exhale. The door opened. She slid inside, the leather cool against her shaking hands. Victor entered after her, the door closing with a soft, decisive thud. The engine purred to life. Neither of them spoke as the car pulled away. Street lights streaked across the tinted windows. Madison stared at the blur of gold and shadow, the night rushing past in silence. Her reflection hovered faintly in the glass, eyes red, jaw tight, her father's jacket wrapped around her shoulders like armor. "I told myself," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper, "that if they treated me badly, I'd walk away." Victor didn't look at her. "They didn't treat you badly," he replied evenly. "They assaulted you." Madison swallowed. For a moment, the only sound inside the car was the steady rhythm of the tires against the road. Then Victor spoke again, quieter this time. "You never should have faced that alone." "I wasn't alone," she said softly. "I had to know." Victor finally turned toward her. His expression wasn't anger now, it was something deeper, heavier. Regret, threaded with understanding. "You wanted to know who loved you without knowing who you were," he said. She nodded. The city drifted past them in silence again, and with that silence came memory, relentless, vivid, uninvited. 2 years earlier, Madison Hale had vanished. No interviews. No society appearances. No gala entrances beneath flashing lights. The tabloids speculated wildly, rehab, Europe, secret marriage, family feud, but none of them knew the truth. The truth was quieter. A small apartment on the east side of the city. White walls. Second-hand furniture. A view of brick instead of skyline. A life that didn't echo with staff footsteps or whispered net worths. Victor had called it madness. Madison had called it survival. She'd been 24 when she finally said the words out loud. "I don't know who I am without the money." Everything in her life had always carried an invisible price tag. Her schools, her friends, her relationships, even the way strangers looked at her when they learned her last name. So she changed it. Madison Hale became Madison Reed. She closed her trust accounts. Took a modest freelance design job under a private agency. Moved into a neighborhood no one associated with power or privilege. She learned the rhythm of buses, crowded cafes, late rent notices, and grocery budgets. And for the first time in her life, she became invisible. It was intoxicating. No invitations. No favors. No smiling introductions that always ended with "What does your father do?" For 2 years, she lived simply, and honestly, she was happy. Until she met Matthew. Not at a party. Not through connections. Not under chandeliers. A copy shop. He'd been struggling with a jammed printer, irritation written all over his face, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up like the world was mildly inconveniencing him. Madison had offered help. He'd laughed at himself, embarrassed. They spoke while the machine whirred back to life, first about deadlines, then coffee, then nothing important at all. He asked her out that afternoon. She said yes. Matthew knew her as Madison Reed, a freelance designer with a tiny apartment and student loans she pretended still existed. He never questioned why she avoided expensive restaurants or international trips. He liked her quiet humor, her steady presence, the way she listened. 8 months passed. She fell in love. And somewhere along the way, she convinced herself that she was no longer hiding, she was choosing. Until the invitation came. Matthew's family's annual gala. His mother, he said, was traditional. His sister, dramatic. His world, very different from hers. Madison had smiled and agreed. And chosen to go exactly as she was. In the back seat of the Rolls-Royce, Madison closed her eyes. "So now they know," she said softly. Victor's gaze remained steady on the road ahead. "Yes," he replied. "And Matthew?" Victor paused. "Matthew chose silence," he said. "The consequences belong to him now." Madison looked down at her hands. For 8 months, she had believed she was building something real. Tonight had dismantled it in under 5 minutes. The car turned onto the long private drive leading home. And with that turn, the girl no one knew began to disappear, while the woman the world was about to judge returned. The gates slid shut behind the Rolls-Royce with a whisper of steel. Inside the estate, everything was still, too still. Garden lights cast long shadows across the drive, fountains murmured softly in the distance, and the house waited with its familiar quiet restraint. It felt like a different universe from the one Madison had just left behind. Yet the outside world had already exploded. By the time the car door closed and Victor helped Madison out, her name was everywhere. Security inside the house moved faster than usual. Staff avoided her eyes, not out of judgment, but awareness. They all knew what had happened. They always knew when something shook the outside world. Screens were already alive in the control room, projections of trending feeds climbing at an alarming speed. Victor handed Madison his jacket back only after she stepped fully inside. "You don't need to see it," he said calmly. "I do," she replied. There was no defiance in her voice, only clarity. A tablet was placed in her hands. The video had crossed 10 million views in under an hour. Different angles. Different cuts. Sophia's slap in slow motion. Natalie's hands twisting fabric. Madison's stunned stillness. Matthew's silence replayed again and again from every possible perspective, dissected with brutal precision by strangers who had never met any of them. Hashtags multiplied faster than comprehension. Some defended her. Others condemned the family. A few still twisted the narrative for sport. Madison watched without flinching. At first. Then the comments grew sharper. Speculation poured in about who she really was. About why Victor Hale had walked into the ballroom like a ghost called by betrayal. About how long the relationship had lasted. About what Matthew must have known. About how much money was already being moved behind closed doors. Then the news alerts began. Victor's phone vibrated once. He stepped aside to answer. Madison kept watching. The Lancasters' name appeared on screen in a financial ticker. Stock fluctuations flickered, downward, fast. Analysts speculated aloud. The term overexposed surfaced more than once. Investors hated instability. Public scandal was the purest form of it. A second alert followed. Then a third. Victor returned. "It started," he said. Madison didn't ask what it meant. She already knew. Across the city, in a penthouse now flooded with noise instead of champagne, Sophia Lancaster stood at the center of her living room, phone pressed to her ear, her face pale and rigid. "They are pulling out," she hissed. "All of them. They won't even return my calls." Kenneth stood near the bar, glass trembling in his hand. "Victor wouldn't do this," he muttered. "He wouldn't risk the market backlash." Sophia turned on him with sudden fury. He walked into my ballroom and wrapped his jacket around that girl. Do you really think he's worried about market backlash? Natalie sobbed somewhere behind the couch. Matthew sat alone at the edge of the room. He hadn't spoken since they'd been escorted out of the hotel through a side entrance, cameras screaming his name while he said nothing, again. Every notification on his phone felt like another strike to the chest. Messages from colleagues, family members, strangers, headlines he hadn't opened but already feared. Billionaire's daughter humiliated at gala. Lancaster family exposed on live stream. Silence of the Sun sparks outrage. His phone rang again. Unknown number. He answered. Yes. His voice cracked. Mr. Lancaster, a man said crisply. This is corporate compliance from Westbrook Holdings. Effective immediately, your position has been placed under review pending investigation into your involvement in tonight's incident. Matthew's breath stalled. I didn't do anything. Silence stretched. That, the voice replied, is precisely the issue. The call ended. Across the room, Sophia's phone slipped from her hand and hit the floor. They are filing charges, she whispered. Kenneth's glass shattered in his grip. Back at the Hale estate, Madison stood in her childhood bedroom for the first time in 2 years. Nothing had changed. The same view of the city, the same polished surfaces, the same quiet distance between wealth and the outside world. It felt both familiar and foreign now, like stepping into a photograph of a person she used to be. Victor paused at the doorway. Legal wants your statement in the morning, he said. Madison nodded. And Madison, he added, you don't owe anyone grace right now. Not them. She looked at him then. Slowly, deliberately, she shook her head. This isn't about revenge. Victor watched her carefully. It's about truth, she continued. They acted without knowing who I was. That's what matters. They didn't see a name. They saw a target. Victor said nothing. Madison turned back to the window. Outside, the city glittered like nothing had happened. But she knew better now. Threads were already pulling tight across boardrooms, bank accounts, careers, and alliances. The image Sophia had tried to protect was collapsing under the weight of a single moment of cruelty. And Matthew, the person she had trusted to see her when the world didn't, was learning what silence truly cost. For 8 months, Madison had lived as someone ordinary. Tonight, the world had remembered exactly who she was. And tomorrow, it would begin to decide what to do with that knowledge. By morning, the world had made its decision. Madison woke to a house that no longer felt quiet. It felt alert. Phones vibrated behind walls. Screens lit up in distant rooms. Voices moved in controlled urgency through hallways that once echoed with calm routine. The story had matured overnight, no longer just scandal but consequence. Victor was already awake. So were the markets. By the time Madison stepped into the breakfast room, the numbers were undeniable. Lancaster Holdings had lost 15% of its valuation before the opening bell. By mid-morning projections, it would double. Analysts were no longer speculating, they were confirming. Victor stood near the window, phone in hand. Harrison Capital has frozen the joint expansion, he said evenly. North Shore pulled out an hour later. International partners followed within minutes. Madison took a sip of coffee. It tasted distant. And criminal charges? She asked. Victor looked at her. Filed. Sophia's slap had crossed a line the cameras never forgave. Across the city, the Lancaster penthouse no longer felt like power, it felt like exposure. Lawyers crowded the living room. Phones rang unanswered. The television played muted coverage on continuous loop. Madison's face paused mid-frame beneath bold headlines that refused to soften the truth. Assault court live. A family exposed. Investors exit in wave. Sophia sat rigid on the couch, hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Natalie had locked herself in her bedroom, the sound of muffled crying slipping through the door in broken waves. Kenneth paced. Matthew remained seated where he had been all night, unmoving. His phone lay face up on the table in front of him. Madison's name hovered on the screen. He hadn't called. Not once. Because now he understood. Silence had already said everything. At noon, the official notice arrived. Lancaster Development Group had been placed under formal investigation for reputational risk violations tied to shareholder ethics clauses. Contracts began freezing one after another, clean severances, legally sterile, emotionally catastrophic. Kenneth dropped into a chair like the floor had risen to meet him. Sophia stared at the wall. No, she whispered. This isn't happening. But it was. By mid-afternoon, the news stations stopped looping the video and started looping the consequences. Financial analysts mapped the collapse in real time. Commentators debated the moral reckoning with barely concealed satisfaction. And somewhere between the numbers and the noise, a name began to rise above the chaos. Madison Hale. Not as a scandal, but as clarity. Matthew finally tried to call her at sunset. The estate security line lit up with his name. Victor answered it. Matthew's voice fractured instantly. Sir, please, I need to speak to her. I just need 1 minute. I need to explain. Victor didn't raise his voice. There is nothing left to explain. I didn't know who she was, Matthew said desperately. If I had known. Victor paused, then spoke with surgical calm. And that, he said, is why she will not take your call. The line went dead. Madison stood in the garden when the message reached her. She didn't ask what had been said. She already knew exactly how Matthew would have framed it. She watched the light fade between the hedges, the sky softening into deep violet, the fountains catching reflections that had no connection to her reality anymore. 8 months, she said quietly. Victor joined her without speaking. I trusted him, she continued. Not because he loved Madison Hale, but because he loved Madison Reed. Victor studied her profile. He loved the version of you that required no courage from him. Madison closed her eyes. And when courage was required, she said, he became invisible. Victor didn't contradict her. That night, the official summons reached the Lancaster family. Sophia's assault charges were confirmed for preliminary hearing. Natalie was formally named in the civil complaint. Video evidence had erased every possible exit. By midnight, the press was no longer asking what would happen. They were counting down to it. Matthew sat alone in the apartment that no longer felt like home. Every object the same. Every space changed. He replayed the moment over and over. The slap, the tear of fabric, the way Madison had looked at him as if waiting for permission to believe in him one last time. And the way he had looked away. His phone buzzed again. A message from his employer. Position terminated. Public association clause enacted. Matthew closed his eyes. For the first time, the weight of what he had lost settled fully into his chest. Not money, not status, not career. Back at the estate, Madison stood in front of her mirror and removed Victor's jacket from her shoulders. The tear in her dress was still there. She hadn't changed it. Not yet. She traced the rip with her fingers. Calm now, measured. Tomorrow, she would speak. Tomorrow, the world would hear her voice. Tonight, she simply stood with the truth. Unhidden, unprotected, and no longer uncertain. Morning arrived without ceremony. No sunlight breaking through curtains. No dramatic silence. Just motion, measured, precise, unavoidable. The estate shifted into controlled momentum the way only systems built for crisis ever did. Legal counsel arrived first. Media strategists followed. Phones moved from hand to hand like quiet detonators. Madison listened without interrupting. Statements were suggested. Headlines predicted. Risks outlined. Sympathy calculated. None of it mattered. When they finished, she spoke once. I'll say what's true. Nothing more. Nothing less. By noon, the camera was ready. No grand stage. No crowd. Just a neutral room, soft lighting, a single chair. Victor stood just outside the frame. The world waited on the other side of a lens that had already decided the story for itself. Madison Saturday. The red light turned on. She didn't smile. Last night, she began, her voice level, steady. I attended a private event under a name that wasn't my own. I wasn't hiding. I was choosing to be seen as a person before being seen as a legacy. The feed surged instantly. She continued. I was publicly insulted, assaulted, and humiliated in front of hundreds, then millions. And I want to be clear about something. What happened to me did not begin with a slap. It began with entitlement. Silence sharpened around her words. People speak differently when they think they are safe from consequence. Last night, we saw exactly who they believed deserved respect, and who didn't. She paused. I didn't reveal who I was to protect myself. I revealed it to show what shouldn't have mattered. The interview ended without spectacle. No tears. No fury. Just truth, delivered cleanly. Across the city, Matthew watched it alone. He didn't blink. Her calm was what shattered him. Not the accusation, not the fallout, but the quiet certainty in her eyes. She wasn't speaking as someone wounded. She was speaking as someone finished. His phone rang minutes later. His father. Matthew didn't answer. Another call followed. Then a message. Your mother has been formally charged. We need to speak. Now. Matthew set the phone down. For the first time since the ballroom, he made a decision without hiding from it. He went to see Madison. Security stopped him at the gate. Madison heard the commotion from the garden. She didn't ask who it was. She already knew. Victor stepped between her and the doors. "Do you want to see him?" he asked. Madison considered the question, not emotionally, not impulsively, but as one considers whether. "Yes," she said. But only once. Matthew was led across the drive without ceremony. No shouting. No threats. Just silence, heavy and deliberate. When Madison stepped into view, he flinched, as if his body reacted before his mind had permission to follow. She looked different. Not dressed in fury. Not dressed in grief. Just composed. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I froze. I made the worst mistake of my life." Madison studied him, not with anger, not with longing, but with distance. "You didn't freeze," she said calmly. "You chose." His breath hitched. "You're right," he admitted. "I chose comfort. I chose silence. I chose the version of the world where I didn't have to be brave." She nodded once. "That's the truth." Matthew's eyes filled. "I loved you." Madison didn't interrupt. "And I lost you," he added. "Yes," she said simply. Silence settled between them, not hostile, not warm. "Final. I didn't come for forgiveness," he said at last. "I came to tell you the truth before the world decides what it is for me." Madison met his gaze. "The world already decided," she said gently. "You just agreed with it." Matthew closed his eyes. When he opened them, she was already turning away. The charges moved quickly after that. No delays. No shadows. Evidence made everything easy. Sophia turned herself in before the warrant reached her door. Cameras caught her exit from the courthouse. No diamonds, no curated image, only the reality she had denied for too long. Natalie's civil hearing followed days later. Kenneth stepped down from the company board within 48 hours. And Lancaster Holdings, once built on image and leverage, collapsed under the weight of exposure. Madison watched none of it. She had said what mattered. The rest belonged to consequences. That evening, she returned to the small, quiet routines she had once loved. Walking the garden paths, reading without distraction, letting the world feel steady again in ways money had never taught her. Victor found her near the fountain. "You did well," he said. "I didn't do it for them," she replied. "I know," he said. They stood together in silence. Not as billionaire and daughter. Just as two people who understood what truth costs. The world didn't erupt all at once. It cracked. Quietly at first, boardrooms locking doors, sponsors suspending contracts, attorneys withdrawing from retainer lists with polished, strategic regret. Names that once moved markets now slowed negotiations. Doors didn't slam. They simply failed to open. Lancaster Holdings entered freefall without announcing it was falling. By the end of the week, investors pulled out with clinical speed. A month later, analysts stopped pretending the decline was temporary. The brand that had lived off reputation now died by it. And everywhere, Madison's name floated without her consent, on screens, across hashtags, inside whispered conversations that tried to decide what kind of woman she truly was. She never answered the debate. She didn't need to. The truth had already settled. Matthew disappeared from public view. No statements. No defenses. No curated redemption arc. He moved out of the city by the third week, retreating to a place that didn't ask him questions, only reflected the ones he had left unanswered inside himself. But isolation didn't bring peace. It brought memory. He remembered Madison laughing in ordinary moments, at burnt toast, at street musicians, at dogs that refused to obey commands. He remembered how she listened. Really listened. As if the smallest words carried weight. And he remembered the ballroom. The pause. The choice. That was what returned every night. Not guilt. Decision. Sophia's case moved quickly. Video evidence streamlined everything. Testimony arrived without persuasion. Staff, guests, security, no one wanted to protect the woman who had mistaken cruelty for authority in front of millions. Her attorney argued stress, public pressure, misinterpretation. The judge didn't indulge any of it. Bail was granted with restrictions. The court date was set. Sophia left the courthouse smaller than she had entered it, no longer wrapped in status, no longer buffered by influence. For the first time in her life, silence followed her instead of attention. Madison learned all of this secondhand. Victor filtered what reached her. He didn't shield her from truths, only from unnecessary noise. "You can stay removed," he told her one evening, as they sat beneath the open sky. Or you can step back into the world. Both are valid. Madison considered the choice the way she now considered everything, with calm, without fear. I won't build a life from reaction, she said. Only from intention. Victor smiled at that. The foundation launched without spectacle. No press conference. No gala. No name attached publicly, not at first. Its mission was simple and precise: legal advocacy for victims of public abuse and leveraged humiliation. Not charity for optics. Infrastructure for consequence. Madison worked inside it quietly at first. Policy drafts. Case selection. Quiet funding approvals. She didn't want to be seen as an icon. She wanted the machine to work without her face attached to it. But the world noticed anyway. Not because she announced herself. Because results began to surface. Cases overturned. Wrongful settlements reversed. Institutions forced to apologize where once they would have buried complaints. A pattern formed. And patterns draw attention. One afternoon, as Madison reviewed case files, a familiar name appeared on the intake list. Natalie West. The same woman who had torn at her dress. The same woman who had laughed while she bled socially. Natalie had filed a request for legal protection. From her own former circle. The irony arrived without invitation. Madison closed the file without commenting. She didn't approve or reject it. She forwarded it to committee. That's either mercy, Victor remarked later, or wisdom. Madison didn't correct him. It was both. The city moved on faster than anyone expected. Outrage exhausted itself. New scandals rose. New villains distracted attention. The narrative shifted the way it always did. But consequences didn't fade with headlines. They lived longer than memory. And Madison understood that better than anyone. 6 months after the ballroom, the foundation hit its first major legal victory, one that forced a multinational brand into public apology and long-term reform. The announcement went live at midnight. By morning, Madison's name surfaced again. But this time, not as a spectacle. As a presence. She read the headline once, then returned to her work. That evening, she stood by the same fountain where Victor had once told her she'd done well. The water moved steadily. No drama. No reflection of chaos. Just motion. Victor joined her. You could step into the spotlight now, he said. They'd follow. Madison watched the water for a moment before replying. Let them follow the work, she said. Not me. Victor studied her, proud, but not surprised. She had stopped being reactive. She had become deliberate. And deliberate people are dangerous in the quietest way. The request arrived without warning. Not through lawyers. Not through media. It came as a handwritten letter, delivered to the foundation with no return address, no seal of importance, only a name in careful ink. Matthew Lancaster. Madison held the envelope for a long moment before opening it. She already knew what it would ask. He wrote without defenses. No excuses. No emotional performance. Just sequence. He described leaving the city. The silence. The slow realization that isolation didn't erase responsibility, it amplified it. He acknowledged the choice he had made in the ballroom without softening it. He admitted he had failed publicly and privately, as a partner and as a man. Then the ask. Not reconciliation. Not forgiveness. A meeting. One conversation, he wrote. Not to change what was done, only to face it without hiding. Madison folded the letter with care. And said yes. They met at a neutral cafe far from headlines. No security visible. No observers invited. Just distance and daylight. Matthew arrived first. He looked older in quiet ways, less styled, less protected. Madison arrived minutes later. He stood instinctively. She nodded once. They Saturday. I don't want to reopen wounds, he began. You won't, Madison replied. They closed when I stopped waiting for you to choose me. His breath caught, not sharply, but deeply. That's fair. I'm not here for your absolution, he said next. I'm here because I needed to acknowledge out loud what I was unwilling to do when it mattered. Madison listened. Truly listened. You wanted your mother's approval more than my safety, she said calmly. Yes, he admitted. And now, she asked. Now I understand that loyalty without ethics is just cowardice dressed well. The truth landed without ceremony. She didn't soften it. She didn't sharpen it. She let it sit. I'm leaving the country for good, Matthew told her. There's nothing left here for me except reminders. Madison believed him. Not because of the words. Because of the absence of drama behind them. That's probably wise, she said. I don't expect you to wish me well, he added. I already have, she replied. He looked up, surprised. Not for you, she clarified. For myself. As they stood to leave, Matthew paused. There's one thing you should know, he said carefully. My mother tried to contact you from custody through a third party. When she failed, she panicked. That's why she requested emergency counsel. Madison's expression didn't shift. She's afraid, he continued. Not of prison. Of obscurity. Madison offered no comment. Obscurity had always terrified those who confused visibility with worth. The trial concluded 3 weeks later. No spectacle. No melodrama. Just formal accountability delivered without theatrics. Sophia was convicted on multiple counts. Sentencing followed within the month. When the doors closed behind her, no crowd waited. No cameras begged for reaction. Silence had claimed what once demanded attention. Madison heard the news during a meeting. She acknowledged it with a nod. And continued working. The foundation expanded its scope. International partnerships. Cross-border protections. Suddenly, what began as consequence became infrastructure. Calls came from governments. From institutions. From survivors whose voices had learned how to be heard. Madison didn't lead from the front. She designed the path and let others walk it. One evening, as she prepared to leave the office, Victor waited by the door. There's an invitation for you, he said. She accepted it without urgency. A ceremony. Global recognition. They wanted to place her on a stage. Madison studied the printed crest. Do I have to speak? She asked. Victor smiled faintly. No, he said. But they want to watch you stand. She considered that. Then handed it back. They can watch the work stand instead. Later that night, Madison returned to the garden. The fountain still moved steadily. Some things, it seemed, refused to change just because the world had. She sat on the stone edge, reflecting not on what she had lost, but on what she had built without announcing it. For the first time in a long while, the past did not feel like pursuit. It felt like distance. A final message arrived on her phone just before midnight. A single line from an unknown number. He's gone. Left the country today. She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. Madison placed the phone face down. And let the night remain quiet. The night didn't feel different after the message. No shift in air. No symbolic hush. Just stillness, earned, not forced. Madison slept without interruption for the first time in months. Spring arrived without announcement. The city softened around its edges, less urgency in footsteps, longer pauses at crosswalks, cafe windows left open instead of sealed shut. Life resumed its smaller rhythms, the kind that exist regardless of scandal. Madison moved through those rhythms with ease. No disguise. No performance. She walked into spaces as herself now, not hidden, not displayed, simply present. And the world adjusted. The Foundation's first annual report released quietly on a Tuesday morning. No headline chase. No media tour. Just data. Thousands of cases reviewed. Hundreds defended. Dozens of institutions forced into permanent reform. The machine was working. That was all that mattered. Victor read the figures twice before setting the report down. You built something irreversible, he said. Madison didn't correct him. She hadn't built it alone. But she had started the motion. And motion, once true, tends to stay true. The ballroom reopened that summer under a different name. Different ownership. Different crowd. The past wasn't erased. It was renovated into something more cautious. Madison passed the building once without stopping. No confrontation. No reclaiming of the place. Some spaces don't need closure. They need distance. On the anniversary of the night everything broke open, Madison visited the garden alone. The fountain still moved. Time hadn't softened it. It had normalized it. She sat on the same stone edge where so many quiet decisions had unfolded since the humiliation, since the revelation, since the unraveling of a life that had never truly fit. She didn't replay the slap. She didn't replay the cameras. She didn't replay the Rolls-Royce at the curb. None of it defined her anymore. Those were events. What followed had been choice. She thought of Matthew briefly, not with longing, not with anger, but with a distant understanding reserved for people who taught you exactly where you draw your line. She thought of Sophia, not as a villain, not as a lesson, but as a mirror of what happens when identity is built entirely on control. And she thought of herself, not as a survivor, not as an heiress, not as a symbol. Just as a woman who had learned the difference between being seen and being known. The invitation she once declined returned a second time. Different organization. Different intention. This time, no ceremony. Just a closed forum. Private leaders. Systems, not applause. Madison accepted. Not to be honored. To contribute where noise was unnecessary. On the day of the forum, she spoke for 9 minutes. No speechwriter. No prepared drama. She spoke about leverage. About silence. About what happens in moments when people believe consequence doesn't apply to them. And she ended with one line. Clean, simple. Power doesn't change who people are. It only removes the cost of revealing it. No ovation followed. Just the kind of quiet that signals shift. That evening, Victor met her on the terrace. "You know," he said, "you never asked me what I felt when that car pulled up that night." Madison tilted her head slightly. "What did you feel?" she asked. "Relief," he answered. "Not because I could protect you, but because I no longer had to." She considered that, then smiled faintly. Later, as the city settled into sleep, Madison stood alone by the window of her home. Not a fortress, not a showcase, a place that felt lived in. She watched the traffic lights change without watching the cars. Motion without fixation. For once, her life felt that way too. Somewhere beyond the city, Sophia served time without cameras. Somewhere farther still, Matthew lived without identity attached to a name. The world had moved on. But the consequences had not vanished. They had simply become permanent background structure, exactly where consequence belongs. Madison turned from the window. No audience. No pursuit. No shadow chasing her steps anymore. Just forward. And that, finally, was freedom.